The views and opinions expressed in these historical letters that may contain vernacular used in the World War II era, the post-war era, and the Cold War era do not reflect the views and opinions of any of the individuals involved with this project, including, but not limited to, the podcast's creators. Morning, Jamie.
Good morning, Allison.
How are you doing this morning?
I'm so excited. It's episode 100.
100.
So I'm doing well. I'm a little nervous because it's episode 100, and I'm a little nervous because it's episode 100. So, but yes, and I got to see you in person. So that was always nice. Like, that's very nice to get to see you in person. We see each other every week, pretty much. But so it's nice to like record now after we got to see each other and hang out, and like do love Sweetie stuff. Like, I got to see Sweetie's old house. Like, I got to see where Miss Darce lived. Oh my gosh. So that was fun. Yeah. But how are you doing?
I am recovering from last weekend. It was a very packed weekend, and then it was a very busy work week, in all honesty. But you know what? The weather's slowly starting to make up its mind a little bit. Like, it hasn't been too drastically one way or the other, and that's helped. I think that's helped a lot of people.
Yeah, I think you're right. Definitely. But I know that episode 99 kind of ended on a note.
Yeah.
Like a tense note. So just to recap a little bit about that particular letter, Sweetie wrote her sister, Jeanne, whom she hadn't heard from. She wrote her at her work. She wrote her at her workplace because they didn't want their husbands to know what they were talking about.
They certainly did not.
So it was a heavy letter. They're both married now. They're both experiencing the things that come along with that. And this is the way that they had to communicate. You know, this was how they were able to talk to each other. They couldn't call each other on the phone. So these letters, they really, like, for me personally, I told Allison this earlier, and we learn a lot more about like the kind of upbringing that Sweetie had in this episode. But just like how Sweetie was kind of going along and you know, in her marriage, we're kind of just going along in the podcast, just trying to like do these letters justice, you know? So this for me, this brought like rawness, the light and shadow, you know? And so definitely had to reflect on these letters a lot more than I normally do when I prepare for the podcast.
Yeah, you just mentioned Sweetie's upbringing. You know, one of the fascinating parts about this episode is that we only have 2 letters for today, and the second one packs an emotional punch. So, as much as a few people might be like, "Oh, well, there's probably enough time to go into another letter," no, there's just no way to follow the letter Sweetie's going to write, which is the second letter that we're going to go through today. The first letter is from Chester, which is exciting. He's actually going to reveal a little piece of his own history right in that letter, which I think is really, really cool that we get this historical record, small as it may be, that adds to Chester and Laura's story. But then we're going to head into this second letter, which is the follow-up to the request from Sweetie last week. We left on that cliffhanger, as Jamie was saying. She's writing to Jeanne at work. She's waiting for Jeanne's response, and this is the answer when she gets that. So it's a letter that was never, I'm sure Lou never saw it. My father, Louis, never saw it. And I'm sure Glen never saw it. It only stayed between the two of them. But it's so relevant to these times. and we're going to get into it, that it's really a privilege and an honor at some points to present certain letters. This is one of those times. So, but I guess we might as well dive in. I'd say standard housekeeping: like, share, subscribe to the Love Sweetie podcast on YouTube. Check out our audio version on the audio channels if you listen via Spotify or Apple Podcasts or any of those, and check out the website again, www.lovesweetiepodcast.com. Jamie, before we get into that masterpiece of a letter that's going to follow from Sweetie, we do have to hear from Chester first. It's episode 100, so here comes the good doctor.
Lacona, Iowa, January 30, 1952. Dear Lizzie, we appreciated your reminder of our anniversary, but most of all, the letter that was part of it. The day passed quietly, as most generally. Though much brighter 39 years ago, it was heavily clouded and threatened snow and rain. I and Aunt Sarah went to Indianapolis on the interurban. We did not get to 2449 North Illinois Street until a little late, and may or may not have given Mama slight cause for doubt. Had a Presbyterian minister by the name of Owen David Odell of Second Presbyterian Church, Indianapolis, whom we, and especially I, like to hear on Sundays now and then, not infrequently. Uncle Cyril was also there, as well as Mama's brother, sister, as could come. I'm sending you Frank's last letter received yesterday. He seems always to be having an interesting and profitable time. I want to remind you that there is an important reference to shortage of electrical engineers, which can be applied to Chris and Dee, also to M.A., and Cookie if their minds should run in that direction. I'm glad of this break in winter. Only 30 more days till March 1st, or add 10 more days and make it 40 more days till the end of winter. We received Henry Field's catalog yesterday also, and I have already picked out quite a few things, quite cheap, that we will have to get this spring. I think I will make out and send my order soon, as to have it as early as possible to plant. I would like to get a red flowering peach. I saw one here in Lacona in the northwest part of town last year and had to get out of the car and look at it. It was certainly unusual, and Mamas say they bear fruit the same as any other peach. I hope your interest in flowers holds out. Have had quite enjoyment with your floricultural efforts. I'm glad Frank is much interested in flowers also, as I have been all my life. Sent Sweetie some medicine yesterday. Made it profitable by sending quite a few things that they may need in the future or sometime when they do need it. I'm sending Frank's letter with the expectation that you hand it to Jeanne and she mails it on to Sweetie. I know that you probably do not get letters from Frank very often, and it is a good bond to keep up, letter writing. I have written a lot since Christmas, and besides, I have not made any resolutions to that effect either. I am also sending, with Mama's permission, some pictures Frank has just made and sent us. I hope it will inspire you and Jabil to get to work with your good equipment and see what you can turn out. I think a lot of our work would be better if you always were not trying to get that Brood movie to smile. Anything natural suits me. I must close and get this in the mail. Love, Papa.
Floricultural, Jamie. The word is floricultural.
He's so great. And I just want to say too, your dad's been getting like really good at reading these letters.
Yeah.
Like he's I like it. I feel like we're just with 100, I feel like just reflecting back on like what we've done.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. And so it just I feel like we've come so far.
Mm-hmm.
But speaking of Chester, so he had to get out And look at, he was driving around. I'm not even
Poor Laura.
surprised anymore.
Poor Laura.
She's probably used to it. But the first thing that we do get is this is their wedding day.
Yeah.
But we learn that Owen David Odell was their minister. So we got to learn when they got married what the day was like. Yeah, that's nice. That's actually quite lovely. It makes me think that he never talked about it before if he's telling her about it now.
Yeah, or maybe Lizzie asked him, like, hey, do you remember who the minister was? There could have been a letter from her, and he was like, oh yeah, it was this guy at the Second Presbyterian Church in Indianapolis, and Uncle Cyril was there. Because it's very brief what he's writing back. He might be answering a question, but like, I'm thankful to Lizzie if she did ask that question, because this sets the historical record for us, which we didn't have before. And I love filling in the gaps here because we know about Sydney and Samuel Sr. We have their wedding book, and we have the information about all these other weddings. We haven't had up to this point information about Chester and Laura's wedding, just simply when it happened, to get the name of the minister, to get the name of the location, to know who was there, and just a little reflection from Chester for whatever reason he's writing it is really, really great. Just to have it. I'm grateful for these like 3 or 4 sentences detailing what was going on from Chester himself. And I'll be looking up this church and this minister to see if it's, the minister is long gone, I'm sure, but I'm going to be looking up the church to see if it's still standing out there in Indianapolis. I'd like to go there someday.
It is quite lovely. And 39 years.
Yep.
That's impressive.
Mm-hmm.
And also, it rained on his wedding day.
Yeah.
That's a good sign.
Is it?
It's supposed to be good luck. It rained on my wedding day.
Well, there we go then.
There we go. See? It's worked out well for me so far. He does the grandpa thing.
Mm-hmm.
Where he's like, they need electrical engineers. Perhaps maybe you should encourage your children to do those. Okay. Thank you, Dad. Thanks, Dad. Yeah. Sure. Get right on that. Always nice to have a Chester letter.
And then we get the Sweetie letter, which Chester's letter is a nice little bright spot painting his little picture of the flowers and the wedding. And then we get the reality check with Sweetie. I don't want to spoil anything about it, Jamie. I'm just going to jump into that first part of the second letter and the second and last letter for today's episode. Airmail to Mrs. Glen O. Joss, Medical Office, Iowa Packing Company, Des Moines, Iowa. 363 North Main, January 31st, 1952. Dear Jeanne, I have just received your letter, and I think by writing right now and mailing this airmail, I will have time to catch you at work before you leave there. First, I'm glad you're quitting work. You've been at it long enough in the first place. You can do justice neither to your housework nor to your job, and while I am sorry that you were called into the carpet and will probably leave with a bitter taste in your mouth, it is probably a good thing in the long run. And while we are disclosing secrets, I might give you a lift if I told you that I left work in Ottumwa under practically those same circumstances. I never breathed a word of it to anyone, and pretended that I was still cock of the walk when I decided to retire. Well, retire I did, but without the usual la-di-da that accompanies it. Why did my work fall off? Well, I can't exactly explain it, except that it is almost a physical impossibility to do 2 jobs well, and we also were having a few growing pains, as we hadn't been married, but from December to July, when Lou was sent to Hutchinson, and I followed within a week or 2. You'll always feel somewhat guilty in your conscience for having to leave the job under such conditions. I do, and sometimes I have a momentary feeling of shame. But shrug it off, don't dwell on it, and never admit to anyone else that you left under duress, or something. Nobody, even Glen, ever need know, and I'm beginning to realize that there is a great deal of truth in the old saw. What he don't know can't hurt him. I still think you can take the deck seat if you try hard to restrain yourself in the additional activities and excess energy. I find my trouble, as I've written you before, lies not in the unusual accomplishments, for I'm rather spasmodic in almost everything I do. My trouble is to keep from magnifying injustices, and to keep from getting blue. I don't take them too often, though I find that once I've started taking them every day or so, I am more apt to keep with them, and so I take for several days, and deny myself their prop for a while. You're skillful enough to cover them, crook or no crook. And did it ever occur to you that two can play the same game? Glen will play hell getting Dexies, except through you or the folks, and when the supply runs out, let him suffer a few days before you replenish the stock, and see how he reacts to it. Don't come right out and tell him you're not going to get any more. That would be like drawing your sword, and would promote open warfare, but be a little forgetful and stall him for a few days. There's nothing like a rude awakening sometimes. Okay.
Okay. So, this letter, first off, right out the gate, kind of brings into discussion the whole idea of, should a woman keep a job while she's married? You know?
Mhm.
And like you can look at it in this day and age, but I kind of want to look at it back in that day and age a little bit, because it's a little funny to think about it now. People are like, many women have children and work. Like this is way more prominent in this day and age than it was back then. But she starts the whole conversation with that.
Yeah.
And so I have to say, like, she's right. It is very difficult. It's very difficult to maintain a home up to like the standards that you wish to maintain it, and also answer to another person, you know, who's paying you money. I can see, and I did quit, and I'm not meaning to take away from women who are able to do it, because it is possible.
Mm-hmm.
However, I feel that it's better to either have a job, and they don't even have kids yet. Well, he's got kids, but it's better to have a job or stay at home. Like, honestly, I am much happier not having to get up, rush around, get the kids to school, get myself to work, get back, then homework, activities. So yeah, and it would seem that Jeanne is experiencing some of this.
Yeah, with taking care of the home. Then we get that reference to good old Ottumwa, and I brought out the Ottumwa mug for this purpose.
Mm-hmm.
For our Pennsylvania listeners, especially listeners that might have joined more recently, just to catch you up on the references here, because she references some names and things. We've got Ottumwa being called up, and then we have Hutchinson being mentioned here. So when Sweetie married Lou, which was in December of 1943, she had been in the southeast portion of Iowa, in the city of Ottumwa, where there was a naval air station during the war. She had been working there since 1942. She meets Lou through the base. That's how they meet. So I strongly encourage people to go back. I think it was episode 13 is the meeting of Lou and Sweetie, and you can go into the whole beginning of their relationship. It was a very fast engagement. 4 months later, they were married in December of 1943. Lou's going to get orders to go to NAS Hutchinson, which is in the middle of Kansas. This is at a time, by the way, for our listeners who are unsure of, like, why is all the Navy out in the Midwest? There is no Air Force at this time, so they're all naval air stations. This is where they're training pilots and things out in these big expanses of the prairie. So he gets orders to go to Hutchinson, and she decides to go with him because she doesn't know if he's going to be sent overseas within a week of getting there, and she wants to spend as much time as she can. And at the time of these letters, that whole time period between December of 1943, when she marries Lou in Ottumwa, and then in July of 1944, when she departs Ottumwa and goes to Hutchinson, there's no whisper that there's any issues at work in any of the letters. It's extremely busy. This is the height of World War II. I mean, this is the time period right before D-Day. And all the clerical work. I still have in my head this image of how she said there was a foot of dust on the floor of the buildings in Ottumwa, and the janitor was having trouble getting through because they didn't have time to stop. They were too busy with all the paperwork and all the clerical work they were doing. And it was wearing down on her. She was really tired at this time period, but she never said she was unhappy working. And then all of a sudden, we get this flashback in this letter, and she's like, yeah, I didn't really talk about it then, but I was relieved to be done.
Mm.
And then she chooses not to work at NAS Hutchinson. And I think she'd gone in for an interview. I think she'd talked to people at NAS Hutchinson. I'm sure Lou expected her to go to work at NAS Hutchinson, and that might have been part of it.
Mm-hmm.
But she decides not to. And we finally get the truth here years later, where she was like, I wasn't going to go work at NAS Hutchinson with the women on that base. She was done. She was done.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that revelation years later that there were other things going on, that even with her honesty in her letters to Jeanne at that time, she still didn't say anything. Now she says it. So it's an interesting comparison to that earlier content. And I encourage people to go look. I think it's like episodes 13 through 25 is basically her meeting Lou through the departure to go to Hutchinson with the 2-bit puddle jumper episode. So if you're looking,
that was a good one.
Yeah,
she's funny.
She's good there.
That your 2-bit puddle jumper.
Yeah,
she's a sassy little thing.
Mm-hmm.
That was a good one. Those were good episodes,
Yep.
And it does give us a little bit more insight into that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also, I think that this letter, we really get into the weeds of like the problems that people have and the issues people are working through.
Yep.
And also, like, during this time, the housework that you had was, I think, way more labor intensive, and there was a lot more to do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I have a washing machine, I've got a vacuum, I've got a little robot that I push a button and it vacuums for me. You know, I've got a machine that washes my dishes. So it's like when you are a housewife in the 50s, and we were going to get even more into this, in the 50s, you have that 50s housewife trope. And it's like that, and like when you see this, it's kind of validating that.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets even better, worse, I don't know. But this actually, it makes me feel very sad for her that she had that she had to make that choice. But she's like, no, she made the choice. She's like, Lou, I pick my marriage and I pick Lou.
Right.
So we know that, you know, and she's like, Jeanne is picking her marriage and Jeanne is picking Glen.
Mm-hmm.
So that's good.
And then we start going into the information about the dexedrine. And this is going to come up a good amount here. So I am just going to play the disclaimer here since we're going to be talking about Dexy. Special disclaimer. The medicines and other medical treatments noted in these historical letters from the 1950s are specific to Sweetie's story and might not be recommended today, or are even more regulated than they were so many years ago. As such, none of the medical information contained within these letters is to be construed as medical advice. Talk to your doctor. Thank you for your attention to this message. Now, back to the show. Yeah, the prescriptions for dexedrine for women to take to keep them calm in the 50s was so much. It was just going on everywhere. We know at this point in the letters that Jeanne's taking dexedrine, Sweetie's taking dexedrine. We knew from earlier letters that Maida's taking dexedrine. I wouldn't be surprised if Sister and Florence were as well. It was just all of the women back then. The 50s housewife. We get to that trope. You just said it, Jamie. Things have to be perfect, so we're going to medicate to make things as perfect as possible. And what does Sweetie do at this point in the letter? I think this sets the tone for the rest of what's coming in the rest of this letter. Let Glen suffer a little bit, and you don't have to go and just take dexedrine.
Did it ever occur to you that two can play the same game? That's not a game. The marriage is not a job. Marriage is not a game. Like, and this, and I'm not blaming her. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying, oh, you should know better, because of course not. 27-year-old, young, like, married mother, like, I don't expect her to have the kind of wisdom that I'm tooting my own horn, that I have. But this is not the way that you handle problems in a relationship. Like, going back and forth, subterfuge, manipulation, lies, like, these are not
Mhm.
These are not effective tactics to having a successful marriage. Now, that's me speaking from this time period too, because it does seem like in the 50s, the burden was on the woman to be quiet. The
Mhm.
burden did lay on her to keep the marriage going. I mean, we see it with Laura. She's not a 50s housewife. She's a 20s housewife,
Yeah.
you know,
Mhm.
but marriages lasted. Marriages lasted, and being married for 50 years, is that success if this is how you were doing it? So these are really great questions to bring up. And I really like that we have this to go through, because that, you know, when you talk about that time period and like what the women went through and stuff,
Mhm.
maybe there is a little bit of responsibility that they hold for the way that the marriages were. Yes, actually, I'm kind of beating around the bush. There is the women also had responsibility in the marriages not being, you know, I don't want to say perfect,
Mhm.
but good, and good communication and stuff. And hiding things and dealing with it that way that's not the way you deal with it.
Yeah. I can't speak from experience, but it would seem the common sense thing. But Sweetie, who's going through this stream of consciousness that she's done in so many letters, her thoughts are going to evolve as she continues into this letter, and she's going to get into some more content. I think, and she's going to strike closer at that truth that everybody seeks. About this crazy stuff, I firmly believe there is nothing so cruel that Papa has ever been guilty of as to accuse us, you, Mama, Sister, Bob, and me. I think the only one to escape the accusation has been Frank, of being paranoid. I've never forgiven Papa for having so abused Bob and called him crazy repeatedly to his face just a short time before his death. And frankly, I believe Papa suffers from a guilty conscience for that little dispute, and wonder if it might not be responsible for some of his discordancy with Mama. That, as I said, is about the meanest, lowest thing I've ever seen done, my father or not, and I advise you this way. Just, the whole damn thing. I think probably you're wrong when you say the folks have expressed themselves to Sister to that effect. It is possible that Papa has, but not Mama. She's had it thrown in her face too often to be guilty of calling anyone else crazy and subjecting them to the hurt that she gets too often herself. Now, here's the way I look at it. There can be no question that you are under a terrible strain. You couldn't help but be, and I know for two reasons. One, I saw the way Glen acted here, and two, I underwent the same thing, in comparison. I firmly believe that since you're through working, and you keep putting it just that way, that you'll be getting more rest, and hence your nerves will become more relaxed. You'll only have one job to do, and you'll have time to spend on yourself that you haven't had, and you'll be able to think of many more things, even if they are things to make Glen happier. You'll not be wrestling with getting this done in time to get your ride to work. You'll not be worrying what you can fix quickly for supper while you bandage an ingrown toenail, and you'll not be cussed out because there isn't a button on his dress shirt, even if there is money in the bank. The main thing you've got to do is to get over the idea that you are lacking in personality, or rather get over the idea that there is anything wrong with you. It takes two to make any argument, and let me tell you, I've come to the conclusion that 9 times out of 9.5, the men come the closest to being dissatisfied, even impossible to please. If you are physically ill with the discharge, which, by the way, I have and have been worrying about until I got up nerve enough to go to the Naval Hospital for a checkup, and am still not satisfied that there is nothing seriously wrong, or, if you feel there might be something really wrong, see a doctor, or more than one, if you're not satisfied, until you find out the truth. Frankly, I don't honestly feel there is a single thing wrong with you, either physically or mentally, that a little time and rest won't take care of. Just how many women do 2 full-time jobs without trouble? Not a damn one, if they'd admit it. Go to someone on your own. not to Kleinberg. He's not God, but to someone who will not give your information to Papa because they are medically speaking associates. It is true. Everything is rosy before you're married, and you're picked to pieces after you're married. Well, I firmly believe one reason is just that you were independent, with a good job and self-sufficient. That, along with the fact that you're still making good money and not entirely dependent upon Glen, rankles the hell out of him. The male ego, you know? I think you've hit the nail on the head in saying the chief trouble with Glen is his jealousy. And if you want to come right down to the facts, his neurosis is much greater than the one you imagine you have. And I mean just that. Imagine. I think actually Glen is to be pitied. He is the one who needs tact and kindness and consideration. And I think now that you've got or will have the time to give it to him, he'll flourish like a little hot houseplant. I don't blame you for wondering about the first wife, and I've long ago come to the conclusion that Glen was probably more than half responsible for their separation. But at least, I'm glad he isn't any longer trying to keep your marriage a secret. As for his lack of understanding of our family, well, I don't wonder too much at that. Actually, we are somewhat closely interwoven, and that in itself is probably part of your difficulty. It was mine, though my redemption lay in the fact that I married a foreigner and had to leave the country. Or I actually suspect I'd be in just the same situation. Being far enough away gives me the opportunity to look more objectively on our relationship. Somewhat. I can see what the folks did for us, especially since Louis is getting bigger and making more demands. But I can also see what Papa did to us. I hate to sound disrespectful, and I do love both Mama and Papa more than you might believe at times, but just the same, some things stick out like a sore thumb. I also wonder just what we might have been if Mama hadn't been there to counterbalance what Papa would have made out of us. I don't think you can give Mama too much credit for the way we've turned out. And surely you can't deny that she's put up with a hell of a lot from that man who calls her crazy, and yet when he gets seriously sick, can't tell her enough about how good she's been to him. I love them both, but back off and look at it with some long-range reading glasses, and you might be able to get a little better perspective on who needs more tact than who.
Well, that stream of consciousness that she so employs when she's writing, I think evened out a bit. The first part was quite turbulent, and then she kind of got into it. I actually, when we were talking about the breaks for this letter, like where we were going to break off, this was actually one of the places where I wrote some notes. And I said, I appreciate the rawness and the sincerity in this.
Yeah.
And it's indicative of every single family. All families have problems, every single one. And they belong to them. Those are theirs, you know. So we really get to see that Chester, he was an incredibly strict, and also it would seem that he would often call them crazy, and that Jeanne seems to be struggling with this.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting to start this episode with a letter from Chester. That's just so, happy-go-lucky. Here's the information about my wedding. I stopped the car, jumped out, looked at this peach tree. Here's these flowers. Here's what I recommend, which is more of an order than a recommendation. But okay, that's coming from that mode. And then we get to this letter, and it answers some questions maybe we didn't even know that we had, which is the curtains are pulled away, the blinds are pulled up, and we get this raw description of the upbringing that the Demaree children had with Chester and Laura, and what a saint Laura is, and the influence of Laura on everything. I don't think it can be understated, and she calls it out here. I can't do it justice more than she just did it anyway, but the ability for Laura to balance out the family, from the absolute force that is Chester. He was a brilliant man.
Yes.
He was a brilliant diagnostician and doctor. He makes a lot of dumb decisions. We've seen this. Go back to the fire episode. Dumb decision. What he's doing right now, when she's writing this letter, she knows her father has prescribed himself and is sneaking around and taking morphine without telling the board. We're going to get to a resolution of that whole thing later in this season. I'm going to tell you that right now. But he's doing that. He's making these decisions and he's arrogant about it. And then we get to this part that I've hinted at ever since we got to the point where we were talking in the second episode of season 2 with Bob's death, that there's something that needed closure. He went to New Mexico in the finale of season 2. He needed closure. Chester was bothered by something. And I've hinted at that there was something coming in the letters that was going to show that that tension was real, that this wasn't just like us thinking that something was happening, that he needed closure from something, but we're not sure what it would be. I had read this letter at this point, so I already knew this line was coming. And what do we get? That he left it, an extremely bad place with Bob. And he has had a history of obviously calling everybody except for Frank, for whatever reason, crazy, up to and including his wife. And he was very upset with Bob for having married someone who was Catholic. He never let that go. I can only imagine what she is holding back about what he said to Bob. The least of which seems to be, I don't even know, well, the crazy comments, and then Bob is dead. And this is the definitive piece that Chester went too far.
Yes, he did. That losing a child is the most stressful thing that anybody can endure. Losing a child. And then he left it on those terms.
Yep.
And that's really rough. I mean, that is, it's rough when you lose someone, but then to lose someone in that manner where it's like he was never going to be able to apologize. And he never would have anyway. We know this. Right. He never would have anyway. So we get to see a little bit of like how Chester and Laura raised the kids, and that Laura was clearly there to protect them from some of Chester's behaviors. Like, so yeah, obviously this is important, but this was the model that Sweetie had going into marriage. And this is the model that probably a lot of 50s housewives had, is that the woman is there to keep the peace, raise the kids, and she goes, just just when you know that your words aren't going to get anywhere, just let it go. That's what these are the lessons that were taught to that generation from this generation, because you know that this was probably a little more common, this kind of relationship. But Laura held it together. She was Saint Laura, Saint Laura.
Absolutely. And then we get this whole part with Jeanne where she's thinking about going to see a doctor, where she thinks that something is wrong with her. And Sweetie's like, there's nothing wrong with you. And we get the interesting part here where she's like, don't go to Kleinberg. We're going to see that name again. Kleinberg is one of the doctors in Des Moines. But even the kids can't easily go to doctors around Des Moines because they all know their father. So anybody she goes to, she's like, find somebody who doesn't know dad so that they don't report back to him, because he is that well known in the medical community in Iowa, because he is that good and he's been around and he does all this good work. And she's like, there's nothing wrong with you. It's Glen. So we start to just hear more and more about Glen because they're going through a rough patch. And she's going to continue in on this theme as we head into the next section. Don't feel too badly about not smoking. I can see your point. It isn't so much that you want to smoke as much as it is that you want to feel free to decide for yourself. Well, for your own well-being, it is probably as well that you have quit. I can't sympathize too much with you there because I never did smoke. But I do think you'll have to decide to do some things you don't want to do, just because he wants you to. Being rankled over the TV programs isn't important. Let me tell you about a girl I knew when we lived at Norwood. She had married young, and had lived with her in-laws for a while, and the mother-in-law had a more strong hold over her husband than she had on the other boys, though I understand she was a papa of types, and she had no more attention from her husband than she would have had if she had been his sister. That, along with the fact that she had a baby too soon, made her most unhappy. And when they moved east, she was just desperate to find a solution to her troubles. Then, when they got here, he'd come home from work just as she was busily getting dinner and come out in the kitchen to smooch. She got so darn mad at him because she was busy, and the thought of all the time he could have been a lover while they were living with his folks just rankled her good, and if she said, "Go away, Woodrow, I'm busy," or "Look out, the potatoes are burning," he'd go pout and nurse his wounded feelings, and then they'd sit through supper without talking, and so on, into the night. She decided something would have to be done. Trivial, isn't it? So she cooked like mad and got everything done up to a point, and when Woodrow got home and wanted to smooch, she welcomed him with open arms. How long it had gone on, I don't know, but such a simple solution. The hell with the TV programs. If he wants to talk, talk, and let the program be damned. Chances are you haven't missed anything so momentous. As far as the children are concerned, that is about the finest example of Glen's immaturity and his need for tact and understanding that he could exhibit. That is true evidence of his selfishness, and if you like to use the much bandied about term, his insecurity. I don't entirely blame him in a way, and yet he should be man enough to overcome his feelings. Well, look at us. I wanted the baby, right from the start. Lou didn't until he found out for sure he would be going overseas, and then he decided he'd rather have me at home with a baby, or waiting for one, rather than out working, making a living for myself, and let's face it, in circulation. He just wasn't too sure either, and so decided a baby that I'd wanted anyway would tie me down but good. So, why doesn't Sweetie have any more children? Let's face it, Lou doesn't want any more, and I've come to the conclusion that raising one right is going to keep me busy. Why antagonize Lou by keeping after him to have another? I've given up entirely the idea of ever having another by plan. If by accident, I shan't weep, but doubt if we'd ever agree to try to have another as we did for Louis. Jeanne, children that aren't deliberately planned often aren't anything more than a bone of contention. And if it is any consolation, look at it this way. You're better off not to have any than to have them, and welcome them into a halfway situation. That's why I'm not going to try to have any more. And if you think you're betraying Glen in writing as you have, I've for the first time said things that I wouldn't admit even to myself. Lou doesn't concern himself much with Louis except to bawl him out right good for some slight misdemeanor, and I feel as though I'm constantly acting as buffer between two good and nice people who just get in each other's hair without provocation. Look at Sister and Bill. How Bill accused Sister and swore because Papa hadn't schooled her on preventing conception. You say, I believe that in his way Glen loves me as much as he could love anyone, but he does not have the capacity for loving the way that we do. Where did we get it? You know, I can't remember seeing Papa show Mama any sign of affection from the time I've been able to remember. Look at Bill. When did you last see him give Sister any more than a warm glance at some joke? And Frank, who seems to rate highest in Papa's affections, have you ever seen him show Maida any more affection than he does to either you or me? I know that Bill's undemonstrativeness gives Sister much grief. She told me so when I was staying with her. Bill makes fun of Lou for calling me Hun. It is something we've gotten from Mama. That doggy love that seems to have come to the three of us girls and didn't affect the boys. Except for Bob. I'll always feel, after spending some time with Bob and Florence in New York, that neither Mama nor Papa, nor Sister nor Frank ever really knew Bob the way I did after living with them for a while. And none of them give Bob the credit for being the fine man I think he was. And one of the things that made such friction between Bob and Papa was the fact that Bob disobeyed Papa's orders and married Florence and became a Catholic to do so. Well, I know that Lou has never loved and will never love me the way I love him. It just isn't in him. And nothing, no amount of love on my part, not one thing can ever change it. It just isn't there. And that is that. As for Louis's teacher ahhing me, Lou does the same thing. And though it makes him mad, if I yak, you're not paying attention, you haven't heard a word I said, he still does the same thing. And I might just as well hush for the moment and start over when he has the time and inclination to listen. And while I'm bearing my soul, I sometimes feel that if Lou thought half as much of me and Louis as he does of his antiques and this house, I'd be sublimely happy. I often wish I could pick up his prized hoop-backed Windsor, break it spindle by spindle, and toss it into the fireplace, that I'd surely soothe my ruffled feathers. But of course, what would follow would be harder to put up with than what I'm doing now. And this is the part of this letter that she just gets to the heart of everything that's going on. And she makes a series of revelations. This is why I said to our listeners at the beginning, we cannot follow this letter with another one in this episode. It's so heavy what she's getting into at this point. Referencing back, there's a whole bunch of different things to talk about. So just talking about the family, the relationship and how much Sweetie held in such high regard the love that Bob had for Florence. And the interesting part about this is, if we think about it, sometimes it's, we don't hear from Florence that much. She's concerned that Florence is drifting. And there's this disconnect between the other Demarees and Florence. But we have to remember, and this is another part of the history, if people go back through season 1, when Sweetie came east for the first time and Lou finally went to England in 1945, Sweetie stayed about a month with Bob and Florence in an apartment in New York. And that was formative for her understanding her brother in a way that the others might have never seen, because they weren't in the same situation. Frank was overseas, Jeanne was in Des Moines, sister was at home, but she gets this critical month where she gets to really live and experience the household from Bob and Florence. And it's this wonderful thing. And there's photos of this that I haven't shared yet. They came up in the collection. I'll make sure we get those online. But it's the happiness of this relationship, the genuine love that Bob and Florence had. And she experiences this, and now she starts reflecting, he will never love me as much as I love him, because she's comparing to the true love that she saw between Bob and Florence. So much so that he disobeyed his father. And, their relationship ended the way, unfortunately, that it did. This isn't to say, that Sweetie and Lou's relationship was not strong. It is very strong. But she's playing comparisons here. And when she arrives at that point, she's like, I'd break every antique around. Enough with everything. His favorite Windsor chair. We know how much she loves chairs. Just to get Lou to really understand. And then she starts to also comment in the same section, and this is why it's so heavy, about how she observes Lou feels about their son Louis. And how Louis was used by Lou during the war to take her, as she says, out of circulation, to make sure that she's at home and I don't have to worry about her going out.
That, and she references that too with Jeanne and Glen. And you kind of do have to, there is, and I think that many women will agree with this, and most likely some men as well, that there's that jealousy factor.
Mm-hmm.
Where that's like, that's mine, I want to make sure, and that possessiveness that, like, as a woman, for a man to be like that, have that possessiveness and be jealous, that the insecurity, those are all things that you can't do anything about. That's somebody else's problem. That's somebody else's feelings. Like the feelings that he was having of insecurity and jealousy, those are his responsibility. And so you can't really do anything for that other than obey. He's like, well, if you do this, then I will feel better. And it's like, well, maybe you need to handle that insecurity first. She didn't have a good model. And, I'm starting to think, and I think it's true, Lou didn't either.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't understand that, like, there are some things that you have to do as a husband. One of the major things as a husband is provide for your family. This is what Samuel did for his family. That's Lou's father. This is what Chester has done for his family. So that's what if I'm providing for my family, then everything else should fall in line. No. And that is a major problem back in the 50s for this, because she's like, well, when she relates the story of her friend,
Mm-hmm.
that to me was actually like, her friend was like, you know what? I need to take care of it. I need to step back and handle my emotions. And she did. And it turned out to be good for her.
Mm-hmm.
She's like, you know, and I have to agree that poor woman, you know, like, didn't get the attention. And then she's like, well, now you want to give me attention. I don't want, no. She worked through that and made things better.
Right.
So I feel so bad, because it's, you know, you can see that Glen and Lou are suffering from these emotions, and instead of dealing with them, they have no tools. And she wanted more kids, and he was like, I don't. And for her also, real quick, I definitely want to make my position clear on this. When she says children, oh man, this right here is probably was the most heart-wrenching thing.
Mm-hmm.
Children that aren't deliberately planned often aren't anything more than a bone of contention. So let's talk about that for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we get into, you know, what Allison and I feel as libertarians, and the way that we, you know, the way that I know I move through life, bodily autonomy is one of the principles that I hold dear. And that is why I'm a pro-life libertarian. And so for her to say that about a child who is a person who we all started out as little babies. We all started out the same way. We all grew in the womb of a woman. And for her to say that really tells me that this idea of children as a possession has been far too integrated into our society and our culture. Children are always a blessing. There is always a value to human life. And so, like, it really breaks my heart, because she's seen it. She's seen children being, you know, that's, she saw it, you know, so this was something that she's speaking from experience. She didn't just make it up, you know, but for her to say that, oh, it's so sad that we don't value children, and that we don't hold them in any kind of esteem, and that, like, they're almost disposable in this current environment. And it just breaks my heart. It really does. This is one of the things she's not the kind of person who would advocate, I think, for it, but for her to feel that way,
It's reflective of the times.
Yeah.
50s, you know, because we have to bear in mind that for a lot of the men, the perfect woman was the accessory on their arm. And that, you know, perfect family, it's the image, it's the optics of everything. So everything has to be perfect. Because everything has to be perfect, everything has to be planned. So things that are unplanned upset the balance of what's expected in this society. We've gotten away from that a lot. But if this is the case in the 50s, you know this was the case all the way back through time. You know, and the pressures on the women. I get what she's talking about broken households. Bringing a child into a situation is unfair to them when there's this contention here. But yeah, I mean, it's a rough spot. I know it's a very difficult part of this letter, and she makes a conscious decision. She says, I'm done. And, you know, even my father listening to this episode, you know, here's the declaration from his mother: you will be an only child. Mm-hmm. Because this is the relationship that's going on. And of course, she could never talk with him about that at the time. And whether she talks with him about it later probably never came up again. but I have yet to see this come up again in the letters. But this was the point. I remember when I was reading this letter for the first time, I'm like, that's it. This is why there are no other siblings. This is why my father is an only child. And arriving at that it's a lot, but it comes from society at the time.
Glen and Lou are cut from the same cloth. They're definitely cut. Like, they have the same way of handling things, I think. And they have, I mean, we're all flawed sinners. I'm not trying to say anybody, but definitely they have different ideas of what marriage should be. And it's the man who had the idea. And so the woman had to go along with it. She's having to manage his feelings, which is just it's not good. And they don't understand how to love their wives. I'm going to tell you right now, I think Lou loved Sweetie. Absolutely. And it's heartbreaking to hear that they feel that they will never be loved. Probably the way that Bob loved Florence. But I think that they do. I just don't think they know how to express it.
Right.
They were never taught, how do I let my wife know? What are the things I can do? And there's things like he knows she loves chairs. So he's going to go get some good chairs. He's like, I know this would make Sweetie happy. I know that this would make Sweetie happy. But it's like, sometimes it's all about like saying, yes, babe, I understand. Or I'm going to tell you right now, I have it right next to me. This is how I learned to communicate in a marriage, and how I learned how to be a good wife in a marriage. And they don't have that kind of stuff. They don't have books and shows about being what they do have is Dexedrine.
Right. Medicated. And for our audio listeners, just so they get the title of the book, Jamie's holding up on the screen.
I'm so sorry, audio listeners.
Yeah, but I want to make sure everybody knows what she's referencing, because this is a seminal work from the 90s, right? You can give the title here, Jeanne.
It's Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. And it's kind of a joke. Like, it's funny, but this book, it's by John Gray, PhD. This book kind of really explains, and it's helpful to me because I can see where Glen and Lou are coming from. Because this book was written for women. It's really written for women. But they just don't know how. They just don't know how to tell them.
The one thing is, Sweetie in this section says, forget about missing a television show program. These are the days of you can't just stream it later. They're truly going to miss whatever's on. She's like, it doesn't matter. Talk. The one thing we know Sweetie and Lou are very good at doing is when things really come to a head, they will sit down and talk about things. And the very least, Sweetie wants to make sure that Jeanne and Glen are doing the same, that they talk these things out. And she emphasizes that. Yeah. She
does. When Glen's ready and receptive, she's like, take advantage of it. And that's good. That's good. And I think too, like they are both still freshly married. Like, she's going to be figuring out stuff about Lou for their whole life. And I take this as just as a moment, a day in time. There are times when he has shown her. We read all those letters from the Merchant Marines. That man loved her, and he just didn't know how to express it. So, but they hopefully, like with a marriage, it's you guys against problems. And it's within a marriage, it's how can we work together to solve whatever the problem is. So you grow in it.
Yeah.
And if it's a good marriage, it makes you a better person. So the fact that they stayed together and we know how she is and how she was, I think they did have a good marriage. It's really sad to hear about the shadow parts of it.
But going into the final part of this letter where Sweetie leads to her, and I will say grand conclusion, when she's really arrived at everything she wants to say. Here we go. You see, Jeanne, it isn't you. Everyone has certain stumbling blocks to encounter and overcome. Just get rid of the idea that you're at fault, and get used to the idea that once you've quit work and gotten yourself back into shape, your work down pretty well, and yourself properly rested, those hours of yours would kill me. You'll get everything under control, and for the most part, you'll have reasonably smooth sailing. I am concerned about your weight. I didn't say too much about it while you were here, but while we are crying on each other's shoulders, I'm feeling terrible about my own weight and have come to the conclusion that I must get a hold of myself and just get in gear. I can do it, even without Dexy, and I'm going to. You can too. Start out first thing in the morning by taking exercises just as soon as Glen goes to work. Then, from the exercises, get the morning cleaning done, and in the afternoon dress and shop and cook and be showered and dressed when he gets home. Isn't that simple? Well, you do it. I'll stay fat. One more thing. Don't give him this routine. Well, I did all right without you before, and I can do it again. I've tried that too, and it doesn't work half so well as, oh, you're wonderful. What would I do without you? Secretly, you have the answer right on the tip of your tongue. But there's the male ego, you know? You'll be all right. I know you will. Crazy? Hell, just look at the pot calling the kettle black. If you're crazy, Papa and several others I know ought to be wearing the latest tailoring and straitjackets. Like G-Mom says, spruce up, Kay. Tomorrow's another day. And even little Louis said to me, well, let's don't worry about that old stuff. Tomorrow's a new day. And what could be righter? This will be the last letter I'll write to you at Iowa Pack. I know just the person to write to, Mrs. Pfeiffer, out by Sister. She'd hold a letter for you, but I'll not write there until I hear from you. Take heart, old girl. Anything you've got troubling you, I can equal, if not top it. I get to feeling, too, like I'd go to the Schuylkill River if anyone said one more word. If you're crazy, I'm crazy. You and me and 145 million others. Love, Sweetie.
You're going to make me cry.
Yeah, and at the end, just for our audio listeners, I'll put it up on the website, but Sweetie draws an illustration of a man with a hat with his arms up in the air smoking a cigarette, basically trying to indicate her state of mind about the craziness. And we get to see her little handwritten note there. Take heart, old girl. Yeah, it's just one of those classic sort of endings.
Mm-hmm.
I have to chuckle at her saying that she's going to get the latest tailoring in straitjackets.
She, you can see it through this letter. If you read the letter from the beginning to the end, you can see her being upset, dealing with stuff, and then getting her sense of humor back.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I'm willing to bet she probably felt a lot better after she wrote this.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, she's cleared the air a bit, and she's set up the plan if they need to get secret letters out again. She says, hey, this Mrs. Pfeiffer over here, she'll hold a letter. So they've got that situated, with Jeanne leaving Iowa Pack. And then we get the classic, which is the title of this episode, Tomorrow's a New Day. We get it from G-Mom out of the blue. Yeah. And then little Louis says it. And she's thinking Gone with the Wind in her head, because that's the last line of the movie, right? Tomorrow is another day. Like, she's channeling her inner Scarlett O'Hara. Yeah, just look on the bright side and we'll all get through everything that's going on. So it becomes a masterpiece by the end of the letter. I think it does.
And she had to throw that Schuylkill River reference. That was nice. It was nice. I really do enjoy that part of the state. It is gorgeous out there. Yeah. It was so lovely to be out there. I wonder, she says 145 million others. I wonder if she looked that number up. I'm starting to think, I think that was like 145 million people were in the United States, because it's like 330 now, right?
Yeah, it is the population of the United States in 1952. Online it's saying about 150 million. She just knows it.
She just knows stuff. Oh, God, I love her so much.
Yep. So she's saying everybody's crazy. Everyone's crazy.
And there we go. And that really honestly is the end of it. because everybody has these problems.
That's right.
No marriage is perfect. No family is perfect. There are certain things we all have, and this was hers. There are certain problems, situations, issues that every single family carries with them, and this one was hers. And this one was shared with a lot of other women in that time period. Oh, I do appreciate it, but like I said, it's just, I want to hug her.
Yeah.
I want to hug her. I feel bad. But I appreciate her. I really do.
And I appreciate, Jeanne, that we get to share the behind the scenes of what the women were going through back then. Because without letters such as these, however raw and emotional and heavy that they are, we wouldn't have that view. We'd just keep seeing that perfect 50s housewife. But remember, always, it was never a simpler time.
Bye, everyone.